This morning, one of the things that I have found is this. A lot of times people like to do exercising. They like to exercise to stay healthy. They like to exercise to basically, you might want to take her to the nursery, please. Yeah, somebody will go with you. Because we exercise to keep healthy. And a lot of times what people try to do is they try running. And a lot of times they fail to realize that when you run, it does a lot of wear and tear on your body. Does a lot of wear and tear on your knees and everything, on your hips and all of that. And so everybody's out there running, and next thing you know, they got to have knee replacements, they got to have hip replacements, and all these other things. I found that the best way to exercise really is walking. And a lot of people say, well, you don't understand, I can't walk far. You don't have to walk far. Just walk. Well, I can't walk fast. You don't have to power walk. Just walk. And so this morning we're going to talk about, let's just take a walk. Let's just take a walk. There are a lot of places that I've been that are conducive to walking. Some places, like you go down south to some of the cities. Diana and I have been to New Orleans one time, I think. Right? I think it was one time. We were catching a cruise out in New Orleans, going somewhere, and so we went the day early. And it just so happened that the hotel we were staying in, you could actually walk out the back of it, and you were right there on Bourbon Street. Now, Bourbon Street is one of those interesting places to go, to say the least. But it also is real beautiful. It is absolutely phenomenal place to go. You meet people from all different walks of life, strange people, out of this world people. It's really wild. But New Orleans is a beautiful place. And so we actually took a tour. And Diana has this thing that she likes to walk through cemeteries. And so we actually got to walk through some of the old cemeteries of New Orleans. And New Orleans, you're not buried in the ground. You're buried above the ground. And so a lot of families would have their own crypts. And they would just go ahead and bury the people right on top of each other in the crypts. And just engrave, their names and everything on it. And you get to see a lot of history in there. And sometimes, let me say this to you. There are times that you may come up to me and say, Pastor, I've got some issues I'd really like to talk to you about. And sometimes we'll sit down. But other times I'll tell you, let's take a walk. Let's just take a walk. Because I have found that a lot of times when things get you down and things seem to bother you, if you just get up and just go take a walk, it just seems to just calm everything down. Every once in a while you're walking, you may play a song in your head. You may just have a clear mind and just allow God to speak to you. But do you know that it's interesting that God talks about our walk with Jesus? He doesn't talk about running with him. He talks about walking with him. And so this morning, we're going to take a walk because the Bible is very important about the Christian life. So many times we get so overwhelmed with everything that's going on around about us that we forget to slow down and just take a walk and walk through this life. Because in this walk, you begin to observe some things that you won't see when you're running. Or you won't observe when you're driving down the road at 55, 60, 70 miles an hour. You see a lot more things when you're walking than when you're running or driving very quickly. So I've got some verses. These are going to skip. I've got them up here, and so I'm expecting, I hope, to keep up. So let's start with Ephesians chapter 4, verse number 1. It says this, therefore I, Paul talking, says, the prisoner in the Lord, urge you to live worthy of the calling that you have received. Skip down to verse number 17 in that same chapter. He says, therefore I say this and testify in the Lord, that you should no longer live as the Gentiles live in the futility of their thoughts. Then let's skip over to chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. Therefore, be imitators of God as dearly loved children, and walk, not run, not go the speed limit, and walk in what? Love. As Christ also loved us and gave himself for us, a sacrificial and fragrant offering to God. Now, chapter 6, verses 1 through 9. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, because this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you, and that you may live a long life in the land. Fathers, don't stir up anger in your children, but bring them up in the training, in the instruction of the Lord. Slaves, obey your human masters with fear and trembling, in the sincerity of your heart, as you would Christ. Don't work only while being watched as people pleasers, but as slaves of Christ. Do God's will from your heart. I know that people say that slavery has been abolished, and from the human sense, slavery has been abolished. But may I say this to you, as Christians, ladies and gentlemen, we are slaves to Christ. And that's where he's saying to work, not as if you're being watched. Your work and my work is not to be people pleasers. We're not out to please people. Don't work only while being watched as people pleasers, but as slaves of Christ. Do God's will from where? Your heart. Serve with a what? Oh man, how many Christians need to listen to that one? Serve with a good attitude as to the Lord and not to people. I get in trouble because a lot of people want me to please them, and I can't do that. Because at the end of the day, I have to give due to Christ. Knowing that whatever good each one does, slave or free, he will receive this back from the Lord. I hear people complaining, I don't get this, I don't get that. What are you doing? You expect something from God or from the Lord, but you want to give anything to him. He says, you give something to me, you'll get it back. And masters, treat your slaves the same way without threatening them. God doesn't threaten us, ladies and gentlemen. He says, because you know that both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him. So, you've all heard the saying, you got to learn how to walk before you run. Too many times what we try to do is we try to get it the other way. We try to start running without walking. But the Bible is very plain in this saying, because in the Bible it says that you must walk if you are to follow. You cannot follow Jesus by sitting. And a lot of people have not learned that. A lot of people have got this one verse, and this is their motto: sit still and see the Lord. And they've never gotten up. No, he's saying you got to walk in order to follow. You can't follow Jesus from a seat. You only follow Jesus from your feet. And you got to move. And God is calling us to move. The one memory that I have of my childhood is just one, that every Saturday my dad would take us uptown Hamilton. If the farmers market was there at the courthouse on 2nd and High, between Front Street and 2nd Street and High, on all four corners would be the farmers market. We would go up to get fresh produce during the summer, whenever it was there. During the winter, there was always something going on, or craft. I always remember, because right across from the courthouse used to be a store called Wilmer's, which was later bought out by Elder Bierman. Right down the street from there was the S&S Kresge's, or 5 and 10 cent store. There was also McCrory's. McCrory, yeah. They were there. There was the First National Bank. There was the Second National Bank. There was Citizens Bank. There was the Journal News, because I had the newspaper, and every Saturday morning I'd have to go up there to pay my bill I'd have to collect, on Friday night I would collect my from my customers, and then I would take that up there, and I would have to make that payment. And then across the street on that same side was J.C. Penney's. And then there was also Me House, and there was all these places. We would come back home, and there was a little store to the right. It was called A&P, Atlantic and Pacific. I think it was actually Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company or something like that. But it was A&P. Came down a little bit later, there was a little grocery store there, and it was called Dablett's. That was our Saturday trip. I also told you that I'm afraid of water and afraid of heights. We took shortcuts along the bank of the river where they had built the levee. There was a path that went right behind Champion Paper Company and Black & Clausen. And on there was a catwalk that went around that building. And it was probably about 3 to 4 stories high. And it was safe to walk on, except when there was ice on it. When there was ice, all it was an open rail with a top and a bottom. And you could slide right between everything, and you could fall. I learned how to hang on to the building and not walk on that side. Those were our trips, and I remember them well, those walks. I remember going and buying things. That was my childhood on Saturday. That's about all I remember was those walks, except on Sunday morning and Sunday night. And Wednesday night, my walk was across the bridge to go to church. There was no question about it. You were walking to church. If it was raining, you were walking to church. If it was snowing, you were walking to church. And those walks meant an awful lot. Because one of the things that we need to understand is this, that when you take that walk, you're moving, you're going places, you're doing things. In the walk with Jesus, I've told you before that there were times in my life that I was not walking with Jesus. I was still a minister, not a pastor. My life was not reflective of that. I wasn't sharing Jesus with people. And my walk with Jesus at that point in time had really come to a standstill. A lot of things happened during that period of time that I'm not proud of, that I don't discuss with people much, because that's not me. That's not who I am. The Bible tells us that we are to walk in holiness and to follow the Lord. And there's some things about this walk this morning that we need to talk about. Because Ephesians chapter 4 and Ephesians chapter 5, if you go back and read both of those chapters, what it is going to tell you is this, that every day you are to live out what God has asked us to do. I know a lot of times we hear all the time that we're no longer under the law. We're under grace. We still have the law that we have to follow. He's still given us commandments that we must do. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. And this is the one thing that he's trying to tell us to do constantly, all of the time, is to follow him all of the way. And so in Ephesians chapter 4 and verse number 1, he tells us that we are a prisoner of the Lord, Paul says. And he says, I urge you to walk in a manner worthy of your calling. Worthy of your calling. And the question arises, as we've been talking about the last few weeks, and that is this: what has God called you to do? There's a couple things that we need as church to pray for. Number one, we need to pray that God sends us some children. Because if he doesn't, we're dying. Number two, he needs to send us workers to work with those children. Because if we don't have workers to work with the children, then we won't have any children. And I know children are difficult to work with. Even when those children are 50 and 60 years old. Those are harder to work with than children that are 5 and 6 years old. But we seriously need to pray. God send us kids. He's done it before, he'll do it again. He's not He hasn't stopped. There's some out there. And let me say this to you. A lot of the kids that have come through here have now walked away from God completely. I think I shared with you last week a conversation that I overheard, or maybe it was Wednesday night I shared it. I went to Arby's. I think it was Wednesday, yeah. I went to Arby's because the dog, I've been trying to get this dog to eat, and this dog just isn't eating anything. So I thought, okay, let's try Arby's roast beef. I like Arby's, the dog will probably like Arby's. So I go there and I get the dog 2 roast beef sandwiches and me 1. Okay? There was a lady in front of me placed her order. She was probably in her early to mid 30s. She placed her order, and the guy who was waiting on her said, "What's your name that I can put on the order?" And she said, "Heather." And he said, "Heaven?" She says, "No, I'm not of that generation." That's the problem. We have now got not just one generation, now we're going on to the second generation where going to church is not important. Parents would come to church, even here, and I'd ask, "Where's your kids?" I'm not forcing my kids to go to church. I'm giving them a chance or a choice. I thought, man, I surely wish my mom and dad would have done that when I was little, like school. And I ask them all the time, so when you go in there and you tell your child to wake up, it's time to go to school, do they just say, "I ain't going today, I don't feel like it"? I don't think so. Get your lazy butt up and get out of here, because I want some peace and quiet. So you're going to school. The Bible was very plain about train up a child in the way that the child should go, and when the child is old, it will not depart. Now I've got parents coming back and saying, "I've got problems with my kids." And I said, "Could I tell you I told you so?" Why? Why not? You know, you let the school raise them. And when you let the school raise them, what is the school going to tell them? Let's see, they can't read the Bible. They can't say the Pledge of Allegiance. You can't talk about God. So what are they going to talk about? Anything else but. So don't complain. But parents do. And they complain because their children, as they get older, start doing all this stuff. It's our fault as parents. Yes, there are sometimes a kid is bad. I understand that. Okay? There are sometimes a kid goes in their own direction. I understand that. But God gave me a promise that the child is going to come back. He said they will. If. And this is the thing. Somebody asked, I know who it is, and you don't have to tell who it is, asked me to explain John chapter 15, verses 1 through 3, where it talks about branches bearing fruit and a branch that's being cut down that doesn't bear fruit, and it is thrown into the fire. And they're saying, that tells me that is not security of the believer or eternal security. That is not correct. Here is the explanation of those verses. Okay? And this is what I'm telling you. There are people that come to the altar today that truly get saved. When they get truly saved, what happens? they get grafted into the branch. Okay? They get grafted into the branch. And as they begin to grow, the Bible says they bear fruit. And after a while, it says that the gardener or the master comes through and begins to start pruning some of the fruit away so that it will bear more fruit. There are some that come to the altar to get a problem solved. They say they put their trust and their faith in Jesus, and they think that they attach themselves to him. They don't. So what happens? Eventually that branch falls away. And he says that he will pick that branch up and throw it in the fire. There are those people who say that they are Christians and they are not. All they did was just got a good feeling that made them feel good for a while. There are some of them that are in pulpits preaching today. There are some of them in Sunday schools teaching. There are some of them that are deacons and all kinds of stuff in the church. But that's as far as it goes. There is no relationship with the trunk. They're just a branch. And they'll fall away. They were never saved in the first place. I go to a guy by the name of Judas to explain it further. And sometime we can sit down and talk about it. But what do I have to do? In order to do this, I've got to walk together. And walking together means together. There are two types of together that we've got to do some walking with. The first one is this. I've got to start walking with Jesus. That's where I'm grafted into and to do these. And as I walk with Jesus, there's something else that's going to happen. And this is where a lot of people are missing the boat today. When I start walking, how long have I known you, Kevin? 9, 10, how many? About 8, 9 years, okay? So 8, 9 years ago, I was here at church, and this guy walks up and says, hey, can I come in and just pray? I just want to pray at the altar. Right? And I said, yeah, sure, man. We'll pray. And so he wanted to pray. I let him pray, and then we sat down and we began to talk. Right? So what happened after that? Life.
Ins and outs, but eventually I
started. He said, I'm glad you opened the door that day because that saved my life. That began a walk, okay? A walk that Kevin and I have had over the last 7 to 8 years. But not just a walk with me. And this is the thing that sometimes people don't understand, okay? Or not just a walk with God, I'm sorry. Not with just a walk with God. It's a walk with me. A walk with an individual and a walk with the church. People out there that say, I don't need to go to church, are out there walking by themselves. And when you walk by yourself, you're missing some stuff. Number one, you're missing that somebody can come up from behind you and do danger to you. Somebody can overpower you. You also aren't observant to see everything. You ever been walking with somebody and somebody said, did you see that over there? And you, no, I didn't. Why? Because we're focused on certain things. And there are certain things that we see. But when I'm walking with someone else, they begin to see some things a little different. And so what ends up happening? We end up learning and growing. In the scriptures, it's not just a fluke that Jesus picked 12 disciples. It's not a fluke that he didn't pick 9. I understand, yes, there were 12 tribes of Israel and all of that stuff, or, you know, it's 12, an even number. Why? Because he sent them out together. He never sent them out by themselves. And I always shared this with you. We shared it a few weeks ago. I think I did it with Anthony, back to back. Why? Because when I'm talking with someone or when I'm walking, somebody's praying for me to cover my back. While they're walking, I'm praying to cover their back. That's why we walk together. Because we gather strength together. When you're walking by yourself, you are free access to Satan. He will throw everything, as my mom would say, everything in the kitchen sink. Anything and everything that he can try to get his hands on to this. And so what the Bible begins to tell us, in Paul, he tells us this. He says that we need to walk with humility, gentleness, and patience, bearing with one another in love and in unity and peace. Unity does not mean that we are clones of each other. Unity means that we have come together. As a matter of fact, my wife and I have been married 51 years. We don't agree on everything, okay? She beats me in coloring. That's the new thing now, okay? She's an expert on these colors, and she says, you do it. I do it totally different than her, okay? And so she can see things that I can't see. And so I could probably continue to do this till the day we both die, and I will probably never, ever beat her, okay? But yet, we're still unified. And we live in love and in peace. That doesn't necessarily mean that we all are clones. I need those other things that are out there and those things that are around. For instance, even in the church, there are times that we're not going to agree on some things. But that doesn't mean that we cannot walk together. I've got friends that are of different faith and different denominations. And we still get along together. We serve the same God. We're saved by the same faith in Jesus Christ. We just see some things differently. But we're still serving. And we're still walking together in these things. And the problem is we sometimes get stuck on differences. And we allow those differences to separate us from our walk. And I don't have to agree with you to walk with you. Because as a matter of fact, you may even teach me some things and I may learn some things from you. There are some times that you will say something and it will make me think about something. I've never seen it, never thought of that, about that. So we got to walk together. Number 2 is found in Psalms 119 in verse number 1. Is it there? All right. How happy are those whose way is blameless, who walk according to the Lord's instruction. Sometimes we've got to walk together. And number 2, sometimes we got to walk away. There are times, for instance, during that period of time that I was not serving God, if you could tell a dirty joke, I would probably tell you a dirty joke. Curse, language was terrible. Other things, and I could fit right in with it. But today I walk away from it. There are times, a dirty joke, I don't want to hear it. I don't need that. A certain language, that people handle, sometimes I'll walk away. I don't need it. As a matter of fact, I try to tell people, why are you using all of those words? That number 1, you're using them in the wrong context. Because that is not what that word means. And secondly, you know how long it took you to tell me that you don't like me? It just took you 5 minutes of garbage words to tell me that you don't like me. Why couldn't you just say, I don't like you? And then we could have had a discussion. But instead, you got to use all of this colorful language that I have no clue what you're saying. It doesn't mean anything to me. And sometimes what we need to understand is that there are times and there are certain situations that you don't have to stay there. There are times you need to walk away. When Satan is putting things in front of you, you need to walk away. And it's okay to walk away. Yes, they're going to say, oh, you think you're a Christian, you're better than me. No, I don't. I don't think that I'm better than you. There's nothing about me that thinks that I'm better than you. As a matter of fact, I'm like Paul, I'm probably the chiefest of all sinners. The only difference is I don't need this. This is not helping me to grow. This is starting to bring damage to me. The Bible begins to tell us that there are certain things that we need to walk away from. And one of the things that we're to walk away from is an old way of living. There were things that you used to do before you were a Christian that God tells you you don't need to do anymore. And you need to walk away from it. There may be some friendships. Talk to them about Jesus, but you don't have to do what they do. When they want you to go out partying, you don't have to. Walk away. And God begins to tell us that we need to do these things. There are some things in your life that characterizes your old life you need to walk away from. You don't need to bring them forward. They need to go away. Because it's going to stunt your walk. It's going to cause some issues, some problems. There are ideas that the Lord says that He has chose us even before the foundation of this world. So if I'm walking together, number one, with God or with Jesus, and I'm walking together with another Christian, then there's certain things that we're going to walk away from. And we learn how to do those things as we're walking together. But let me ask you a question. Growing up, you had parents, and your parents told you to do something. And I know the answer that you're probably going to say, but I'll give it out anyway. Why did you do it? Because what? Because they told you to. Huh? Because they told you to? Because if you didn't do it, you were going to get a whooping. You were going to get a spanking. You were going to get disciplined. Do you know why we were supposed to do it? Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days on this earth might be long. We did it because we love them. You know why we obey God? Because we love Him. That's why we walk away. We walk away because we love Him. We're honoring Him. And by honoring Him and by walking away, it shows our love we have for Him. Because when we stay and do, we're showing a disrespect to Him. And so, God tells us that out of love and out of awe and wonder that we are to walk this way. He's given us instructions on how to walk and what to walk away from. And we need to learn to do those things. And then in Ephesians chapter 5, he wants to tell us the other way to walk. And that is to walk forward. God has never, ever given us instructions to walk backwards. Always to walk forward. You see, who's my father? Okay. It was really weird because my dad was always, his initials that was his name. We always called him AT. And then we get something from a cousin of mine that says that actually my dad's name is Alex Terry. And they didn't like the name, and they just changed it to AT, and that's what he was called all of his life. But actually, his name was something else. So now I got some research to do. But if God is my Father, and I'm constantly walking forward, then what am I doing? Okay. As I'm walking, yes, I'm getting closer. I'm also following his directions, right? Because God is always saying to walk forward, or run the race, and don't look back. But what happens when I'm doing this is I'm also showing respect to him. To walk backwards is to show disrespect to the Father. And sometimes we don't realize that. By walking backwards, we're showing disrespect to God, who is our Father. Because where has God ever told you to do anything wrong? I can't find any place that God's ever told anybody to do something wrong. Everything that God has always told people that I find in the Bible is right. They didn't always choose to follow. And if we really say that we love him, then we honor and respect him. Our walk shows what we truly believe. And sometimes we have to learn this. Look at Ephesians chapter 5, verse number 1. Remember the paintings of the little boy walking with the Father? And it shows the Father walking, and it shows the little boy trailing behind, stepping in the Father's footsteps. Ephesians chapter 5, verse number 1. Therefore, be imitators of God as dearly loved children. Verse 2, look at what he says. And walk in love as Christ also loved us and gave himself for us, a sacrificial and fragrant offering to God. So if I'm going to be an imitator of God, I'm going to walk in his footsteps. And bring back verse number 2, if you would, Taylor. Can you give me verse number 2 again? And walk in love as Christ also loved us and gave himself for us. A what? A sacrificial and fragrant offering to God. When we are walking in the footsteps of Jesus, we are following him, what are we doing? We are being an imitator of Christ, and our sacrifice, which we are doing daily, has now become a fragrant offering to God. Sometimes we ask, why am I not blessed? Because we're not sacrificing. And the offering that we're sacrificing is not a fragrant offering to God because we're not walking in the paths that he wants us to walk in. We're not following those things. So what we need to understand is Paul says that it is a fragrant offering. It is a sacrifice to God. And so when you make that step, it's just awesome because where you're going, you become a fragrance to people around, and they begin to see what's happening in your life. They see what you're displaying, and they want that. They want it more than anything else. We need to understand a lot of things, and that is this, that the law of God is like the doxology. It's complete. It's the end. That's it. He's not giving us anything new. He said, this is the way it is. The Bible has told us in Ephesians chapter 4 and in Ephesians chapter 5, and then also in the first part of chapter 6, it's telling us how to walk. He's giving us these instructions, and that is to walk together, walk away, and walk forward. And if we don't do these things, we're going to fail. And last but not least, Christ gave us a pattern to follow. And that is to be a servant. We're here to serve. Not to, there was I don't know if it was a painting, a movie, or whatever, but there was this big old chair, a big old rocking chair. And I don't remember if it's in the movie of Raggedy Ann or what, but Raggedy Ann gets up in this big old chair. And when she's in this chair, her feet are dangling. Can't move, can't go anywhere. And she's just sitting there in the chair. A lot of times Christians are sitting in the rocking chair and looking at how big this rocking chair is that God has given us. And our feet, we look at it and we think they can't touch the ground because this task is so great. I can't do this. And we just sit there in the rocking chair with our feet dangling as time just goes by. And God's saying, no, you're capable of getting up out of this chair. Your feet can hit the ground, and you can walk, and you can do the task. You can do the task. We need to quit listening to the enemy that tells us we can't. We need to listen to the Master who says, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. I don't do it. He does it. And he does it through me and through you. But the only way he's going to do it is if we get up and start walking. Sitting gets us nowhere. I don't know about you, but I love to travel. I love to go to new places. I love to meet new people. Whenever I go, there's a lot of times I'll strike up a conversation with somebody I've never met before. And we just begin talking and just begin sharing all kinds of stuff. And my life has become enriched by listening to people and understanding what people go through. And I say to you this, God has told you, start walking. Walk away, but always go forward and walk forward. Quit letting the enemy get you down. Whatever God has called you to do, you need to do it. We're coming to an end of a year. I don't know what the end of this year is going to bring, but I do know something. If it doesn't end, we got another year. And we've got stuff to do. Too much is happening.